Hello and welcome to today's episode of Date in a Blink, where we're hosting the dating and love expert, Crista Beck.
Modern dating sucks, but it doesn't have to. Here on the Date in a Blink podcast, you'll listen in on 10-minute voice-only speed dates between strangers. The experience is designed to move people beyond mindless swiping and marathon messaging. Our position on online dating? It's time to stop collecting pen pals and start, going on actual dates.
Online dating? That actually involves dating? Is that even a thing anymore? But for real, dating should be fun. We hope listening in inspires y'all to try new ways of meeting people. Tune in every other week to hear a new couple go on a date. In between, we'll talk to relationship experts about how the date went and what we can learn from it.
Will our handpicked podcast matches find love on these Blink dates? Or will they say goodbye to each other after 10 minutes and never look back? Tune in to find out.
Before we jump into today's episode, here's a quick word from our sponsors.
If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain a bit. It's totally free, and Anchor will distribute the podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and lots of other podcasting platforms. Not only that, but it has creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. It also lets you make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make your podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
We hope y'all enjoyed hearing Dan and Lauren's date last episode and are excited to hear Crista Beck's take on it. We know we are. But before we get to that, one of the things we love about hosting dates like these is that we get to be a part of people's journey to love. But have you ever wondered how movies influence the way we think of love and romance? If so, you have to check out Happily Ever Aftermath, which explores exactly that. We hope you love it as much as we do. We're here on Date in a Blink today with Crista Beck. She spent the last 12 years helping people find love again as a dating coach and matchmaker. Single people come to her when they're not meeting the right people. They're tired of the inauthenticity of dating apps, or dating feels like work, and what they really want is a real connection with a quality person. She's been featured on ABC, NBC, Fox, and TEDx. With over 20,000 hours of meditation, as well as an award-winning violinist, Crista believes in the power of real love and its ability to change the world. She is also a podcast host and author of the Amazon best-selling book, Break the Glass Slipper, Free Yourself of Fairy Tale Fantasies and Find True Love in Real Life. In this paradigm-shifting dating guide, she exposes the societal fantasies about dating and relationships that sabotage our ability to attract a healthy and happy long-term relationship. We're so pleased to have Crista here with us today to share more about her expertise with all of y'all. Thank you so much for joining us, Crista. Yes, I'm so glad we're here.
Yeah, I'm glad to be able to be connecting with you two and be able to be on this podcast with you. It sounds fun.
Yeah, we're super happy to have you here. We're really excited to talk with you about your background, some of your experiences, share some of your knowledge with our daters, as well as the general audience as well, and also talk a little bit about the date between Dan and Lauren. All right, so we're going to jump right in. In your TED Talk, You're Not Too Busy for Love, you talk about busyness as a tool to avoid confronting our feelings. As many of us know, confronting feelings can be uncomfortable and for some quite painful. So what are some pointers you have for someone who is ready to confront their feelings but afraid of the discomfort that comes with it?
Well, the first thing, I guess I was thinking about this in terms when you say confronting, I like to think of it instead, because confronting sounds so intimidating or like you're going to have a conflict. And I think that's one of the deeper thing that's going on because we haven't as a society really developed a deeper connection with our feelings. So I like to look at it more from developing a deeper relationship with your feelings instead of confronting them. And, I was just speaking with a client actually today. Some painful feelings were bubbling up for her. She was feeling lonely and she was feeling a little sad and a little irritated. And this was a new journey for her to be really stepping towards her love life, but also towards what her feelings are. And I use this analogy of like throwing up, like, when you want to throw up and you know it. You know you just ate something bad and you know you need to throw up, but you're just like, oh, I just don't want to. But there's the gurgling and it doesn't feel good. But you're like, oh, okay, I don't want to. And you can kind of consciously keep it down a little bit, but you know once you throw up, you're going to feel so much better. And then you do, and you're like, yeah, that did it. But there's an uncomfortableness in it. And in the same way, because we're so not trained to really be with our feelings, there may be an uncomfortableness, so I would say the first step is just to be open to that there may be some uncomfortableness with what feelings may be coming up, and to just get curious about them and to start just asking yourself, what am I actually feeling right now? And then you can also ask yourself, what am I needing? I think asking those two questions is a great way to start developing your relationship with your feelings.
So you just said by asking yourself, what am I needing? And I know I've personally really struggled with understanding, what do I need? So I'm curious to know, how do you, we might not have enough time to go through this in super detail, but I'm curious if there's any high level things that you can suggest for people to have that kind of introspection to understand and identify what their needs are.
Well, there's different needs we have, right? We have needs of our body. We have needs spiritually. We have needs mentally, emotionally. Where I tend to steer my clients towards, and where I even steer myself, is developing this deeper relationship with my heart and really getting like, what does my heart really need? Which is a little more softer voice. It's a little more tender. It's a little more not, when you ask your mind, what do you need? And then you think about all the things you need, you're kind of thinking it through, and it's a little harder and it's a little more checkboxy. But when you slow down and you're with your heart, you're like, what do I really need? Really being willing to just see what bubbles up and to like be curious about like what, I've asked myself in the past, oh, what do I need? Or what do I want right now? And that little tender heart of mine, I almost see it like a little inner child. One day she just wanted Kraft mac and cheese. And that's something that I ate when I was a little kid, but I think I just needed some comfort that day, a little bit of feeling like nostalgia. And I'm telling you, so I went to the store and I got it, and then I just felt better. It satisfied something. So even if there's weird things that may come up, just like wanting a box of mac and cheese, there may be just some deeper needs that you have that seem silly, but if you start to provide them for yourself, it's an interesting journey that one can take.
I love that so much. It's pretty deeply human, which actually goes into some of what I want to ask you now. Another thing that is really part of the human experience is the fear of being hurt or rejected. A little less happy than Kraft mac and cheese. And it really sucks. And despite being confident and fearless, things happen, we get hurt. It's inevitable, even when we think we're doing everything right. And so we're wondering if you have any tips on how folks can pick up the pieces after things fall apart, and how can one do that without suppressing their feelings or past hurt?
Okay, so you're asking how to pick up those pieces.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm going to stay in the same feeling realm. I think an important way to really pick up the pieces is, well, one is to really get that. I don't think breakups or losing someone gets the enough reverence for the amount of grief that it can really cause someone. When people have a breakup or really a divorce, it can feel the same as death. And it can be really painful. And a lot of times in our society, what we do is in general, just come on, just go out and find somebody else, or go, let's go drinking, or, let's just forget about it and let's just avoid it. And there's all these ways of things that we do that avoid feelings. And because it's just so overwhelming. Sometimes it can be just the grief can feel so sad and so hard. And so 2 ways I think to approach this is just to give a breakup or a divorce and the reverence that it needs. So, And just to know that you will be going through the stages of grief, whether you like it or not, the denial, the anger, the depression, the bargaining, the acceptance, like this is part of it, especially if it was in a very close relationship and you were with them for a while. And this just to know that you may be bouncing back and forth between one day you'll feel denial, like, oh, I just don't believe it. I don't believe it. And then the next day you'll feel a little depression. And then the day after that, you'll feel anger, but then you'll go back to denial again. And then the day after that, you're like, okay, I'm just going to accept this, just to allow that there's this beep, boop, boop, boop back and forth that happens. And just to get that that's going to happen. That's what happens in grief. Mm-hmm. And if you can just allow the space for that to happen and just to be conscious of that, you will definitely have the tendency to want to avoid your feelings. So what you can do is really distinguish your style of avoiding your feelings. So a lot of people have where, maybe they'll just stay busy. And that's what my TEDx talk is about. Or they will overdrink, or they'll overeat, or they'll binge Netflix, or they'll just scroll TikTok, or they get obsessed. Sometimes people even stalk their ex-partner because it's just another way to avoid feelings. Mm-hmm. So for me, I know I'm avoiding feelings when I'm scrolling Instagram for a long time, or I'm like binging Netflix for like 5 hours. I'm like, okay, something's up here. So I think good starter access is to determine what your way of avoiding your own feelings are. And then to notice, oh, look, I'm doing that. Oh, I've been on TikTok for like 3 hours now, or, or I've been really going out drinking a lot, or I've been having sex with lots of people, like just knowing what your way is can be an access to interrupting it.
Right. Recognize not problem, but recognize the pattern.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about, in one of your other appearances on Fox 7, you talk a bit about blind dates, which is obviously very relevant to what we do here on the podcast, and how they can be a good tool for finding a meaningful connection beyond immediate physical chemistry. And I feel like this switches the gears a little bit from what we were just talking about in terms of, like feeling your feelings. And so I'm curious, what advice can you share with our listeners when it comes to looking beyond the physical? I feel like we just talked a bit about internally. So I'm curious how we can apply this in that blind date sort of spectrum.
Yeah. Well, there is scientific research. I got my degree in communication studies, and we did a lot of research and reviewed a lot of studies about nonverbals and attractiveness and communication between different sexes. Like I studied all of that. And there is scientific research that backs and it's a fact that people do get more attractive the more you spend time with them. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times what people do is, they do you think they're cute or not, pretty or not, handsome or not? And then if they're not, then sometimes people blow someone off. So what I recommend is, one, go a little deeper. And I know that's what your app is all about. Like you really want to find a real connection with a quality person. In order to do that, I would say to just really know what you value. Like what's the experience that you're really wanting to have ultimately with someone, and then date from that place and stay open to learning more about what they actually value in their lives, and also like really allow for a connection to happen instead of just someone crossing off or checking off all the check boxes. And developing a connection over time with someone takes time. Like I would say give people at least 2 or 3 dates to see if you feel respected and you had a good time and you felt like you're just really curious about them and you're interested in them, instead of putting all your eggs in the are they fit enough, or are they, good looking enough? Because here's the thing, if you are looking for someone long term and you'd love to find someone to spend the rest of your life with, you're both going to get old. And you're both going to be 70, 80, 90 years old, 100 years old. And looks aren't going to matter. You know what's going to matter? If they're going to actually drive you to the doctor when you need to go. So look for more of that good-hearted nature in people instead of all like the looks, because you'd be surprised how many people can really, they grow on you. They could become more attractive. I've had this happen with clients over and over again. They're like, I don't know about this guy. And then I'm like, well, just see, did you feel good with him? Did you have fun? Yeah. And then the second day she's like, you know what? I actually do feel attracted to him. So just give it a little more time.
This makes me so happy to hear. And I think one thing that we're really excited about is offering people the chance to do that using an app, which is really hard nowadays because apps right now, they're baseball cards. And so we're excited to help folks go beyond that immediate physical chemistry, and hearing you talk about it, I think you express it far better than we do. So thank you.
Oh.
So I have another question for you. So in a recent podcast episode, It's Time to Leave Your Comfort Zone, you talk about diving into the unfamiliar and learning to look at dating as if it's an adventure. And I think it goes without saying, but opening up and diving into the unknown means being vulnerable. And we're wondering if you have any advice for people who struggle with opening up and being vulnerable.
Well, there's different reasons why, people may not feel comfortable being vulnerable. So it's really hard to generalize. We all create things in our lives, or create patterns, or we create ways to protect ourselves. And there are healthy ways to protect ourselves and unhealthy ways to protect ourselves. I recently just spoke with a woman yesterday. We were doing a deep dive on her love life, and she expressed, we got to the heart of the matter was that she saw that she had a chip on her shoulder. And underneath the surface of her showing up on these dates and on the apps and everything, she might have had this cute look and pretty face, but what was really going on was, I'm not going to like them and I can't trust them. And she really got to see, like, wow, like I am showing up everywhere like this. And so she needed to, I recommended that, there's just some work that needs to be done, like looking at that and, healing that, right? Oh, look, but also just to be objective about it. Like, that's just the way that she developed to protect herself, because from the disappointment from the apps that she was on, from feeling like some different men let her down. But we discuss creating a healthy boundary. Like, you have to protect yourself. You can't just be like a little lamb and just go along with everything. You have to have healthy boundaries and really developing that healthy clarity within yourself of what your boundaries actually are. What are you really wanting? Learning how to sort on the dating scene. I recommended that she really develop that muscle. Like, that was time for her to develop that muscle of her really having that deep clarity and really knowing how to communicate her boundaries. That can be done in a vulnerable, present, authentic way where she still has her heart open, but she's not unconsciously putting those walls up.
Right. And I'm wondering if you have tips for how to identify the chip on your shoulder, because that's a huge step in and of itself.
Well, part of my work is helping people to identify their blind spots. So it's really helpful to have someone to be able to powerfully reflect back to you and to help you to see your blind spots, because, when you look at your blind spot in your car, it's your blind spot and you don't really know until you pull over in the other lane. You're like, whoa, 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 whoa. I just almost hit that car. But it's like, but there is a way for you to be able to see your blind spot. But I do think it really takes someone reflecting back to you, like hiring a coach or a therapist or something like that, depending on how deep you want to go. But I think that the tip is to have someone reflect back to you, or be open to feedback, from friends and family. I don't know so much about getting all your dating advice from friends and family because I hear a lot of really bad advice that doesn't work, but it's so general in our culture that people keep propagating it over and over again. But I would say, if you can authentically have someone you trust, you can be like, what do you see that could be getting in my way? And being willing to hear the answer. That takes a lot of bravery to do that. And a friend may not feel comfortable doing that. That's why sometimes people hire a coach like me, because they're like, you don't know me, you'll tell me the truth.
I think that's a really great point. And one thing I also want to kind of follow up a little bit, get your perspective on this. As you said, it's one thing for you as an individual to initiate the conversation with someone else, to say, hey, I would love to know what you think my blind spots are. I'm open to your feedback. I want to hear about it. I appreciate that you punctuated that asking friends and family might not be the best route to go, because they, at the end of the day, they don't want to see you hurting and they don't want to give you feedback that might hurt you.
Yeah, they
And
don't
so
want to ruin the
They also,
relationship with you
yeah,
either, you
they
know?
also
yeah.
might have different desires than you do. If you're talking about
Mm,
finding a relationship, they might think that you should be with X type of person as
yeah,
opposed to Y type of person.
yeah,
So
Why aren't they a
it's
doctor?
another layer to add, right? Why
yeah.
aren't you a
Yeah.
doctor or a lawyer?
Yeah. Yeah. And so building on this thought, one thing I find is that a lot of people, as they do go to coaches and therapists, is I feel like we get so many tools that we're really excited about because it's helped us so much. And so I'm curious what your experience is or what your perspective is on if someone is going through this kind of renaissance with themselves and they're seeing how beneficial it is, and then they see a blind spot in someone in their lives. And so they might want to jump in and make a suggestion or engage with them in that way. I'm curious kind of what your perspective is on that. Yeah. Like, come along this journey with me. And the person was probably like, I'm not ready for that.
Tread lightly.
Yes.
I think it really depends on what level of closeness that you have with that person. But everybody does have their own journey. Oh God, that's a really hard question because I feel like it can't be black or white. It really just depends on the person and how close you are with them and how you can diplomatically approach it with them. I have a hard time with that question. What do you think?
Oh, I agree with what you're saying. It definitely depends on the person and the situation. And when I'm pulling the thread a little bit further, it actually kind of reminds me a bit of some of what I have to do with working in product management and in technology is understanding that the people that I'm working with do not necessarily want my feedback.
Yeah.
They do not, especially if I'm trying to understand what's going wrong for them, how we can rectify the situation. And so it's so funny because for me, it seems very obvious and cut and dry that in my professional life, there are ways that you can navigate these conversations
Yes.
very effortlessly
Yes.
without pulling up people's defense mechanisms.
Yes.
But it does not translate well into interpersonal and your personal relationships because it can come off as cold and calculating, or it can come off as really overstepping boundaries.
You know what came up for me when you said that? Like, you know what? Okay, so you know why you're able to do that at work? Is because you created a context for that to happen, like yearly reviews or a weekly check-ins with the team, or how are we going to improve? Like there's a certain context that's been created between you and your coworkers or with the team, which makes it appropriate to be like, hey, we haven't reached this goal. There's this, there's an impediment here. We need to work on that. So I'm wondering, what just came to me, I never thought about this before, but like, what if we were to approach it first with creating the kind of context of communication you want to have with someone, especially in terms of like, let's say like we're in the romantic realm with this podcast right now. Like, what if you were to create a context with someone like, hey, I'm really wanting to explore, empowering one another and reflecting back to one another and having open conversation. And is that something that we want to integrate into how we are with each other? And, maybe there's just, I'm just winging it right now, sharing this with you, but like, I'm just wondering if there's just the context of it has been missing in being able to do that, maybe with friends and family.
I think you're so right. In the workplace, we're pushed and, encouraged to grow and learn. And I think it's not that we're not in relationships and romantic or platonic, but there isn't structure around it. We're never taught how to find a partner. We're not taught how to look for love. We're not taught how to build great friendships. And, we learn it as we go through life, but there's no, and maybe our parents give us advice or like, oh, I like this friend or I don't like that friend, but we're not taught it in the same way. And so it doesn't have that same context. So I think you're really onto something.
Yeah. And, I do know of some couples that they do create a context. They create like either weekly check-ins or monthly check-ins where they just kind of decompress, share what's going on, share what they've been feeling, what they're needing. There are couples that actually do that, but they have had to generate that themselves. It's not part of our culture to do that. Part of our culture is to avoid everything at all costs.
Very averse. Yes. It's so interesting that you're saying that the way that you've expressed the way that you can create the space in a friend space, in a romantic space, it sounds so warm and inviting. And I'm thinking about my own personal life where I'm like, all right, partner, we're going to do a quarterly review. We're going to, it's like very unsexy.
Yeah, no.
So I love the way that you phrased it, because I feel like that makes it so much more approachable, and it makes sense. Because for me, I'm thinking, in a work context, how do I have effective one-on-ones with my peers, my reports, my managers, so on and so forth? And then translating that into my personal life, it does sound, where's the fluorescent lights kind of a thing. And the way that you described it, I feel like I see the candles. I see the warm, open, inviting space. I see the vulnerability and the connection. So I think that's such a beautiful way to suggest for people to, engage in a way that you can actively check in with your partner, whatever stage that you're at, whether it's the beginning, the middle, maybe nearing the end. We know relationships, some last forever, many go through seasons.
Yeah. And I also think too, with just, with your listeners, your single listeners, if that is a priority of personal growth, and you love to learn new things, and you really want to passionately, grow together with someone, and, be with someone that wants to look at themselves and always wants to be the best person they can be. I mean, if that is your intention to find a partner like this, to have these kind of conversations, I think it's great to, at some point in the beginning stages of dating, having that kind of conversation. And then instead of saying, okay, we're going to set a date now every month, we're going to being well, what would that look like to you? What do you think? How would a couple put something in place so that we are always growing and reflecting with each other, and, not sweeping things under the rug? What have you used in your life? So it can be this conversation, and the context can be created together, instead of you just thinking what the context should be and putting it on someone, actually co-creating that context together. I think that could be a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, I love that. And I think this is such a natural transition, speaking of singles looking for love, to transition to Dan and Lauren's date in particular. So I'm curious, when you were listening, were there any areas in Dan and Lauren's conversation that really stood out to you about, something that went really well?
Yeah. I think the thing that went really well is I could tell just by listening to their voices that they both had, both Dan and Lauren both had enthusiasm to be there. They had similar topics to talk about, that similar interests. So there was a lot of overlap. But the thing that I thought went really well is you can tell they both showed up willing to explore this and willing to connect. And they really seemed open to that experience. And that's what I thought really stood out and worked between the two of them.
I'm wondering, and this might be a little repetitive of your earlier response, but what are some takeaways from the date that you feel might help blind daters moving forward?
I think the thing that really stood out with Dan and Lauren is they were both curious about one another. Lauren asked Dan, Dan asked Lauren, and they weren't just scripted questions. Sometimes people show up on dates with I got to ask these questions, and I'm in an interview, and I better know if they're going to be my husband or they're my wife or not. It's just ugh. But they were natural in the moment. They were Lauren said something and he was like, oh yeah. Let me ask her this. And so it felt nice. It felt natural and fluid. Well, I thought they were both adorable. So adorable. They're so cute. One thing that may be helpful, if she really wanted to connect with him, and I get nerves and I get nervousness, I get it. And sometimes that's why you have to give dates another try, because sometimes people are really nervous on that first date, and they can just be so nervous that they communicate in a different kind of way than maybe they normally would. But I would tell Lauren to just slow down and take some deep breaths and really listen to him, and that she doesn't need to do all those she was everything he said, it was she was his cheerleader. She's, hell yes, that's amazing. Yep. But she wasn't letting him finish his thought. Where if you looked at how Dan listened to Lauren, Dan listened to Lauren. Like, he didn't talk over her. He gave her the floor. And it was towards the end of the call that there was this nice flowing, a little bit more back and forth where, Dan passed the ball to her and then she passed the ball to him. And then it was just more nice and relaxed. And that's the space when you can just take a deep breath and slow down, when you can really start having that deeper connection and let things start to bubble up. But sometimes women feel uncomfortable. I know this may be a stereotype, but just see if this fits for you. Feel uncomfortable with silence. And sometimes women have a tendency to fill that silence with their words, and just to be cognizant of that. Like, you don't need to do that. Just listen. You don't have to cheer them on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot to learn from Dan and how he listened.
So I have another question on that. How do you recommend people do that effectively in a space that's, like audio only? You can't see. So it's sometimes hard to know when the other person is finished. You don't want to seem like you're not paying attention. And so there's almost this, am I going to interrupt if I want to be part of the conversation, but I don't know. It's like it can be sometimes hard to navigate that. So I'm wondering if you have any suggestions.
If they have the floor, just zip your mouth. It's hard because you want the banter, and that's what I liked about them. There was this
when they're done, right? Like that's
there was what was really nice too is there was this playful banter. Lauren also had this really sweet kind of flirtatious, not like in an overly way, but she was very engaging and like supportive. You can tell like there was this playfulness there, but they got to it. They had these moments of just kind of listening and passing the ball back and forth. But I think just be willing to like have a moment of silence or something there. I don't know. That's a really good question. Like, how do you navigate that? I mean, we're all doing it.
I know it's something that I think I need to work, because even now I'm like, okay, I want to ask a question, but I don't want to interrupt her. And it's done. And even when Laura and I speak, I notice, and maybe it's something I need to work on, I am much more impatient. And so the moment there's a silence, I'm like, okay, I'm ready, I'm answering. But when we're in, meetings together, she just, takes a longer beat. And sometimes I'm unintentionally cutting her off because of it. And so I think it's this really interesting thing, especially in this virtual world where we have different cues of how do we make sure that we're leaving space for somebody else. And I know something that I try really hard to do is, check in with Laura. Hey, do you have any questions? Or, hey, I saw you on mute like I did earlier, and kind of give her some space to chime in. But it can be hard, especially like on a first date when, like you said, you might be nervous.
Yeah.
So I will chime in a little bit there, because this is something I used to be very much, I'm sorry, did the middle of my sentence interrupt the beginning of yours type of a person, where I would cut people off very unintentionally. And so one of the things that I learned to do, especially early in my career, this is one of the things that actually does really help. And I don't know if this is something that y'all have heard of before, but when you're in training, a lot of times what people will do is they'll say, does anyone have any questions? And they'll just go immediately on to the next thing. They'll wait maybe 3 seconds. And that does not give people enough time to think and decide that they want to raise their hand. So the rule that people use in training is 7 seconds. You ask the question in a more inviting way. The way that I phrase that is not generally the way that I would ask or solicit questions from people. You wait 7 seconds, and that works in a professional environment, but in conversation, that's way too long.
Yeah.
But I've noticed that sometimes people will immediately respond right when someone finishes. And that also subtly sends a cue, in my mind, at least, it subtly sends a cue that you were waiting for me to stop talking so that you could say the thing that's on your mind, which gives me the impression that maybe you weren't actually listening to what I was saying. And so I remember getting that feedback from someone early in my career, and I have learned to stop and actually give myself additional buffer time before I respond, to make sure that A, that person is done speaking, and B, to create the space to make sure that what they said is given the space to breathe before I directly go and respond. And it's like a conscious choice that I have to remind myself to make to create that space for other people. And I found it's pretty effective, but I do forget all the time. And I have my moments where I go crazy and have fun and just, be my natural chatty self.
Yeah. And that's the thing with conversation. Like it's like a dance, it's like dance moves, sometimes you just, your partner grabs you and spins you. And sometimes they say something and you want to, say this one thing. So I think it's just a matter of being cognizant of, am I giving this person enough room to breathe? Am I giving them enough space to be heard? That's like a question I think that people can ask themselves, like, am I giving them enough space? But I think a playful conversation, especially the one that they had, it is like a lot of banter. Like when you banter with someone, they're interrupting someone and riffing is definitely there. And I don't see it so much as interrupting as more as you're building onto something. I think just with all the studies that I've done with men and how they listen, how they speak, men sometimes need more space to really process their thoughts. And so when we women sometimes, and I know I'm being general here, but when we women are all together, we're like, and then when we bring that same kind of fluttery energy to like a conversation with man, it may not fit as well to be able to, if your goal is to really get to the depth of him. And that may mean allowing some space, like you said, the 7 seconds to like see if he goes down into his well even more and comes up even with more depth. Sometimes that quick chatter can actually prevent someone from going even deeper.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it reminds me that even just the differences between communication between people that are socialized to be more masculine versus feminine in that style of communication, it's also introverted versus extroverted in terms of how you process. So what I've noticed, and something that I can't remember where I learned this or picked this up, but it's if you're wired to be more extroverted, if someone tells you to think before you say something, it will often shut you down because you're used to processing out loud, and that's how you process.
Yes.
Versus those who are introverted, it's the exact opposite, where if you ask someone to speak out loud before they've formulated the thoughts in their mind, that also shuts them down. And so it's just this, as you said, it's such a dance to figure out, what's the styling? Are they more of a lead? Are they more of a follow? Are they processing internally or externally?
That's a great point. And that is beautiful. That's true. Like the extrovert introvert kind of thing. It really is this dance. And I love that you said that because, okay, I'm a musician and I used to be in a band and we used to jam together and, and I played electric violin. Ooh. And there, when you're jamming, you have to pay attention to what the bass is doing and the drums are doing and the guitar and the singer, and you just kind of start to blend in. And in the same way, like musicians have to pay attention, and then sometimes some beautiful songs can come about. And if you just kind of are in tune, it's like a subtle in tuneness with someone. And then sometimes musicians come together and they can't jam at all. They're just not on the same vibe. And just to know that sometimes dates, you're going to go on a date and then there was this nice jam session and then you're going to go on some dates and you're like, wow, like we didn't jam at all. And that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Transitioning a little bit back to Dan and Lauren in particular. So they shared some feedback with us after the date saying that the experience cut out a lot of the nerves of face-to-face interactions, and that knowing that they weren't on display really helped ease their experience. So beyond the insights that you've already shared with us about how daters can look beyond the physical, we're curious if you had any thoughts on how blind dating in this form can help people feel safer and more vulnerable.
I mean, the way that it can have them feel safer and more vulnerable is because it's totally private, right? Like they don't really know each other's like Insta handle or anything. They're pretty much strangers and they don't have the background information, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, it's purely blind in all ways.
Yeah, they only know each other's first names.
Okay. So that, I think on that, just that alone, that the anonymous nature of it, where you can just feel like, well, I have nothing to lose here. I can just talk to this person and then just kind of have fun with it and not feel like I think that can give someone freedom to feel like you can just talk without having any repercussions on your social media or anything like that. So there can be that safeness of that. And then with vulnerability, I really feel like vulnerability, you're either going to allow yourself to be a little vulnerable or not. I think the vulnerability comes from how you're going to approach going on one of these dates. Like, am I just going to allow myself to be myself? Am I going to allow myself to share? And then, and there is like, you have nothing to lose. I think that's the part that it's just 10 minutes of your life. So, and you're just talking to a stranger without any repercussions. So if anything, that could feel very freeing, almost like I like your app too, because it reminds me of this art project that I was a part of. And it was like a facilitated conversation between two strangers over the phone. And I got to participate, and I participated with a stranger. And then there was a facilitator, and they asked us all these very deep, weird questions, but it was like it was an art experience. And you got to like leave in this really like expanded, artful way. And you never were ever going to be connected with this person. So it just kind of reminds me of that, because I felt so much freedom and liberation in doing that art project with talking to a stranger. Like I just felt like I can just be myself.
To be honest, this, and maybe Laura, I'm sort of answering the question a little bit myself, which maybe I shouldn't, but I think you're really right, Crista. And there's a vulnerability and a level of kind of freedom in certain interactions. And one of the places that this concept was born from was me getting to know strangers in total darkness, having no idea what they looked like. And there's a freedom in not knowing anything about them, but there's also a freedom in knowing they don't know anything about you. They can't see me. They can't see, what my hair is doing. They're not judging, the height or what I'm wearing. And it's just kind of an interesting way to interact with someone, because you can kind of let go of some of your inner insecurities. So,
yeah. And see if there's a jam session that can happen.
Right.
Is there something nice that little bit happens?
So now I have the $1 million question.
Oh, $1 million. Do I get $1 million for answering this question? Right.
The 2-cent question. No, I'm kidding. The big question, the key question, date in a blank. What did you think? Did they match? And why or why not did you think they matched? And I'll give my guess, but we will hear everyone's guess, and then Laura will reveal what actually happened. So, Crista, do you want to do the honors by guessing first?
I think yes, based on everything I heard them say.
I also thought that they would match. Laura, as the host of the date.
As the host of the date, I am still optimistic that they will come out as a band called Blink-183. So that was how I left. I left this date, and I was like, if there isn't a book or a band tour coming out of this, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. So I felt very strongly that I felt similarly about a lot of what we were talking about earlier on this date, on ebbs and flows, positives and negatives about the date itself. But I was really optimistic that there was enough there to keep it going. And I'm happy to report that they did match, and they both rated the experience a 10 out of 10. And yeah, I was so happy. And so Dan really enjoyed the comfortable nature and the format and felt at home immediately. And Lauren very similarly loved how easy it was. So I love that easy is something that people keep saying. And one of the things that really stuck out to me is, she said that it was nice to just sit back on her bed and chat with someone. And I got such nostalgic vibes from that, of just thinking about, being on the phone when you're, a teenager and you're getting to know people, and there's curfews, and, you can't just go out all hours of the night. And there's just something really special about chatting with someone on the phone who's not there with you, but you feel their presence. So. Mm-hmm. As we wrap up, a question we love to ask all of our experts: do you have any words of wisdom or advice for the singles listening to our podcast?
I would say the main thing is to really love and honor yourself, really get in tune with what you're really needing and wanting out of your life, and really make sure that the person that you ultimately choose to bring close into your life is in alignment with what you're really wanting your current life to be, and also your future life to be. And that it's okay, even if you're attracted to them, but if they don't fit, it's okay to let people go, and you will find someone else. It's okay.
That's so beautiful. Thank you so much for that advice. And thank you so much for joining us today. As our final question, how can our audience get connected to you?
Aw, yeah. Well, if they want to be connected with me, they can go to my website at Crista CristaBeck.com, CristaBeck. My mother wanted me to be a little different with my name. And a fun thing they could do if they wanted to on my website, they can take my dating IQ quiz, and in just a couple minutes, they can determine what their dating IQ is. And there's buttons all over the place to do it, so they'll find it. But that's also really fun, and it's free.
I'm about to go take this dating.
Crista, it was such a pleasure having you on the show with us today and for hearing more about your expertise and your background and for chatting with us about Dan and Lauren's date. Thank you so much for taking the time. It was such a pleasure.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me. Good luck with your good luck with your app.
That's all we've got for you today. Shoot us a message on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at The Blink Date or at Date in a Blink to let us know what you think. If you want to try voice for speed dating from the comfort of your home, download the Blink Date app today. You can also sign up to participate in Date in a Blink by visiting our website at www.theblinkdate.com. In the meantime, thanks for joining us for this episode. We hope you enjoyed listening and look forward to talking with you again next time.